Knowing your comparables and using tools like Cloud CMA is critical to pricing your listing correctly. We're going to find out more with John and Sandy. So pricing your home in this market is critical. Pricing it in any market is critical. So what is your approach to accurately pricing a listing?
Okay. So one of the things that Sandy and I do is we look at all the inventory that's out there.
And you're an expert in your neighborhood and you know the inventory.
I hope to think so, yes. I hope to think so.
Better than anybody.
Between going to all the properties and living in all the properties and having friends that live in the properties, yes.
Right. So it's very critical to go actually see the properties that are out there. As far as comparables are concerned, we go back probably about 6 months, James.
Okay.
And then really critical now is the pulse of the market is what's actually in escrow. And if you have good relationships with other agents, not necessarily from the same company, but you've got good relationships over the years, they might lend some insight as to what they're in escrow with. And of course, you've already seen the property, so you know the conditions, so that you're more prepared when you meet your clients.
So use your network to get information on what the dynamics of the market are doing currently.
Absolutely.
That's great. How much validity do you place on price per square foot?
None.
Mm-mm.
Zero.
Why?
Because you can't look at, in a price per square foot, you can have an 1,150 square foot house that has a full 180-degree ocean view, and that is going to have a higher price than something that you're looking at a block wall. You know, you can't look at that. So
it's
there's
not
no
apples.
at all.
Where it is significant or where it does have some impact is when you're doing planned unit developments and there's condo after condo after condo. And let's say you don't have any comps within that complex and you go to the one down the street, the square foot's about the same. That's really where it's more impactful.
So what do you bring on a listing presentation?
So when we go on our listing appointment, we obviously come in as prepared as possible. And our goal is for them to feel like we're so overly prepared and know almost more about their property than they do. We come in with property profile. We've checked with title to make sure that we're supposed to be talking to whomever we're meeting. We come in with all of our marketing. We come in with net sheets, and I know John has talked about this, a range of net sheets, because we have an idea, but there could be specific nuances that adjust it a little higher or lower, so we have a range of net sheets, which shows all of the different fees that they may encounter. But we also, most importantly, always come with our listing paperwork. And we bring copies of it, not just one. We bring at least 2, sometimes 3, because in case you make an error or whatever. And we kind of feel them out. Definitely in certain situations, the seller is like, nope, I'm absolutely not. I'm going to interview multiple agents. I'm not going to do anything with it right now. And that's okay. We've actually had a listing not too long ago where the lady, she said straight up to us that she didn't like the person that she had interviewed previously because she felt like he was too pushy. He was like, well, just sign the listing. Just sign the listing. And John was like, well, we're not going to do that. We're going to just walk through this with you, and we're going to give you our feedback, and we'll follow up with you later. And as we're walking out of the house, she's like, well, if you have the listing stuff, I'll just sign it now.
That's great.
So we just turned back around and obviously signed the listing paperwork. So a big part of the whole listing is not only being prepared for anything, but also that relationship, that rapport, because you have to, John uses the term for being an escrow, to dance with the person on the other side. You have to dance with your seller too.
Absolutely.
You know, and having a rapport and putting their trust in you, you have to earn that. It doesn't just come automatically.
You know, closing a listing presentation is probably the most valuable thing we can do as a real estate agent, because you're pretty much guaranteed going to get that commission. Exactly. What do you bring on your listing, and how do you go over those comps, and how do you discuss pricing?
Okay. For me, we do bring all the comparables, as I mentioned, some from 6 months ago, some from a year ago. Depends how many things have actually sold in the last 60 to 90 days. We do bring net sheets, and my net sheets, I do a range from a low, a middle, and a high, because I haven't seen the property yet.
So you do 2 or 3 different net sheets?
Absolutely, yes. So when I'm done looking at the property and letting the sellers guide us through the property and asking all the pertinent questions, By the time we sit down to actually talk, I know what price it's going to be. I know what net sheet I'm going to provide for them.
So discuss how you approach price. Do you get what the seller is thinking they should be? How do you?
I asked that question.
And what if they say, John, the reason you're here is you're going to tell me?
Oh, okay, that's fine. I said, well, I have that. I have the net sheet right here. Here's what I think an initial starting price would be. This is in a range. Do you feel comfortable looking at these net sheets that if we get something in this range, that you're okay with that?
Okay. So you're not, you're kind of feeling them out.
Right.
You're trying to get a gauge on what they're thinking so you don't blindside them.
Right.
And then you soft shoe it, and then you discuss why it's important to list it at market value.
Absolutely.
So Sandy, what if a seller is completely unrealistic and they think their home is $300,000 or $400,000 more worth more than it really is? How do you approach that?
So that always is a little bit more of a challenging situation, but we've had that occur, especially with things that have happened in different markets. You know, the perception is, oh, well, my neighbor sold for this, so I certainly should get more than that because my house is better.
Of course.
Because everybody's house is better, right?
Of course.
And we just have to return back to the comps. We show them the direct comparisons. And then again, going back to having that insight of properties that are in a pending status, what might be happening with that property, how that one compares to the one that we're sitting in with that seller, and being very straightforward with them. We have very hard conversations and say, this is realistic, this may be, or in order to get this, we would have to do this. So we really talk about different scenarios to hopefully facilitate it, but we also have said that's not realistic.
So how do you handle a seller that says, oh, well, let's just try it at this higher price. Let's just test the market. I don't have to be there tomorrow, but I'd like to test the market at a higher price.
So then the education becomes more about the stigma that happens. And that's a huge one. I work with a lot of buyers too. And the first question that I get, especially right now, is, well, it's been on the market for 21 days. I'm certain I can get it for this price. And they want to offer much less than the list price. Now, that may be what it's valued at, and the seller may have overpriced it, or it may just be that buyers are a little more deliberate right now. But if you start too high, that is automatically going to happen. It's going to sit, and then you're going to get that stigma. The buyer's going to want to offer less, and then people start to wonder, well, what's wrong with it?
Right.
And then you might not even get what it should have been sold for in the first place.
That's great. I love it. And what about Zestimates? So everybody goes to Zillow, Zestimates, to find out what their value of their home is. How do you compete with the Zestimate overpriced home?
I tell them right away, Zestimate is not an accurate analysis of their property right away. I always go back to the story, and people probably heard this a million times from me. The guy that owned Zillow in Colorado and Denver had a Zestimate done on his property, and they were $1 million off. So,
and that was the guy who owned it.
Yeah, and they don't take into consideration condition or even seller concessions for the property.
Or views.
Or views. They don't get very, very specific.
So how often does that come up, the Zestimate?
Not very often anymore. It did probably a decade ago when it first came out, because everybody just went online, pushed a few buttons, and thought that's what their house was worth.
It was novel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it's nice to at least understand what Zestimate, pull it up yourself and figure out what it is.
Right.
So if the conversation does come up, you're not surprised.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You should be the Zestimate. You should be your walking, talking Zestimate. You should actually know before you go into that property a range of what this property is going to sell for.
How much? So let's talk about finding comps. What if it's a difficult place to find? Maybe there's some off-market deals that has happened in the area. But what about pulling up comp that sold about a year ago?
Every year could be totally different. You know, you look at where we are now versus where we were a year ago, and if we had our crystal ball working, where we will be in a year. So you have to make adjustments based on what was the activity. Were things selling really fast a year ago, or were they taking 60 days? Were there everything selling over asking, or was it everything had a price reduction? So you have to take those kinds of things into consideration. In addition, you have to look at whether they started where they sold also.
So price reductions.
Yes, so are they selling within 1% of their list price, or is it 30% over or 30% below? That's a huge difference in where you're going to be looking at it to compare to your current property too.
So you said earlier that getting a title search
Yes.
for off-market properties is just as important as doing an MLS search.
Yes.
So
So for us, if there's not a lot of comps, we do, even if there is some comparables that are there, we do go to title companies and see if there's been any off-market properties that have sold. And you have to be careful on those comps because some of those are just interspousal transfers or something from child to parent, those type of things. And you got to be critical of that and know how that sale actually went down. Yeah, so we add that to our list of other comparables that are there.
and Progressive Title can pull those comps for you immediately.
Yeah, you just call them up, take care of it. But those are great not only for listings, but also when you are in escrow. I know I've done this before, that I had a hard time finding comps, and I knew that the appraisal was going to be a sticking point. So I called the title rep to see if they could find any additional ones, and they did. They actually found one that the appraiser used, and we wound up coming in at value too. So we're not only for the listing, but also while you're in escrow, having that
Talk
tool.
about, and some people want to analyze and scrutinize and go over every detail.
Those people that are engineers, like you said, they've already have their own data. Before you even get there, they have already made up their mind what their house is worth, right? They say, Mr. Smith down the street, I've got one more bedroom than he is, that's worth $100,000 more. And they have all these bars and charts and graphs to solidify, hey, this is what I really want for my property. So we really do break it down, James, to the comps that are actually there and compare it to the neighborhoods that are there. And more importantly, it's the condition, the upgrades, and we do add value. If it's the same house for the same house and one guy's got a fourth bedroom, or say all the bedrooms are the same, but this has a remodeled kitchen or remodeled bathrooms, we're always going to add value to that. So I work in neighborhoods where everything's about the same square footage, and people have done varying things over the last 60 years to their property. But we do add value where we see it, and we also let them know what selling as is really means in this market, that if you're really not going to do anything, when we go there, we give them an analysis. Does the cost equal the value? If you're going to be doing this, are you going to get this rate of return back?
And what do you like to see? For every dollar spent, what's your general?
At least 2.5 times that amount coming back. So if they're going to do their kitchen, but I see all the windows need to be done, I say don't start. If I see the flooring needs to be done and they have an old heater, I said, this is going to cost you about $150,000, and am I going to see that back? And 150 plus maybe another 150 on top of that. We really have very, very strict conversations with these people. And lately, most of the properties are being sold as is.
Yeah.
We do some improvements sometimes. If there's carpets there, we know there's hardwoods underneath, we'll come and get the hardwood flooring done. And I know the prices to do all these things because I have so many people who work with me in making these houses look great. And then if it gets to really bigger stuff, we do ask some of these people if they've had a sewer line camera run down, if they've had a fireplace camera. Things that are the big ticket items, like roofs and sewer lines, are the two biggest ones. So their house may be like the house 2 doors down from them, but the house 2 doors down may have a whole new sewer line. The house across it may have had a new roof in the last 5 or 10 years. So we ask very, very specific questions about that and determining our value.
How have you seen appraisals come in short of the listing price or the selling price?
Not yet.
Not yet.
And well, now the transition in the market, it should be easier to comp out properties. Do you meet the appraiser there, and if so, what do you bring with you?
Yes.
Go ahead, Sandy.
Yeah, absolutely. We meet the appraiser there. As listing agents, 100% we meet the appraiser there. As a buyer's agent, I try, especially if I'm uncertain that we'll be able to come in at value. But yeah, you bring definitely additional comps. How did you get to that listing price? How did you, if you're in escrow for over your list price, bring comps to support that, obviously. If, again, same type of thing, off markets, this is a huge one, and meeting the appraiser. You also want to kind of develop a rapport with them. How quick are they going to get the report back? Did they make sure that they saw that the water heater is double strapped so that you don't have to go back and delay? Are the smoke detectors up? And you as the listing agent, if you haven't done it before you go on the market, you need to be there before the appraiser to make sure those things are done too. Because there's nothing worse than having to wait for the appraiser to come back to check for a smoke detector in a bedroom.
Great advice. And they charge an additional fee to come back.
Yeah,
Right.
which of course makes everybody upset.
Right. We think we put our appraisal hat on if there's very few comps, and you got to think a little bit outside the box, like they're going to be thinking. So if there's only maybe 1 or 2 comparables, and let's say they're a little bit dated, I'll go a little bit further geographically, even if it's in the same school system. I said it's still Torrance school system, that type of thing, and they'll go across the street to 90505, say, versus 90503, and I've seen them be very open to that.
Well, that's good information. Thank you for sharing. I know you guys are extremely busy, so thanks for stopping in the studio.
Always a pleasure, Jeff.
Thanks so much.